You are now listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk here.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Great Scott! Give away!
Welcome to the House by the Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be Sean.
Hello.
And we'll be discussing Pet Sematary, the 1989 Stephen King adaptation, because there's been in recent weeks, the trailer announcement, or the announcement that was already made a while back. They're doing the remake of Pet Sematary, and the trailer has come out recently. So there's a lot of buzz about that. And Pet Sematary is one of the more well-appreciated Stephen King movies we haven't got to yet. Because, we got, what have we covered? We covered Cujo, The Shining, Maximum Overdrive.
We haven't done Carrie, I don't think. We haven't done any De Palma stuff.
Yeah, we haven't done Carrie. We have, we did
It. Or did we
the
do
new
It?
We didn't do the miniseries.
Yeah.
We haven't done the Pet Cemeteries. We haven't done, I'm trying to remember, there's so many of his, like Misery we haven't done. We haven't done like the Shawshank Redemption or Green Mile, the more like dramatic stuff. Because there's been so many Stephen King adaptations, like the Shining miniseries, and then there's some we talked about Gerald's Game. I don't think we did a full episode. We just talked about it. So there's like Stephen King stuff that comes out.
I went into the show.
Yeah.
It's not really Stephen King, but...
Yeah, or Castle Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Stephen King stuff kind of comes in waves. It seems like there'll be a while where there's a bunch of adaptations, and then there's kind of a little bit of quiet, and then a bunch of adaptations, and then it's quiet. And then like the massive success of it and the anticipation for that, I think led them to want to go to Pet Sematary, which is another property that, at least has a reputation and people think fondly.
Sometimes remakes are bad. Sometimes horror films don't hit. But it's like when horror films do hit, it's almost like studios are surprised all of a sudden. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or they're just like, oh, wait. Like they remember, we can make money on this. Like Halloween now is like doing huge. Like we're recording this, What's today's date?
It is October 28th.
Yeah, and
so these are a little bit delayed in coming out.
Yeah, but Halloween's doing huge. It was huge last year, and every time it's like studios like, oh, maybe we should move on this. It's like, yeah, when you make a bad horror film, sometimes people don't show up.
Yeah,
or if just granted, it is known quantities that often are these huge box office successes, but at the same time, it's not like horror is this like little niche thing. Like it does big business, especially for the budget you can do it on at times.
Yeah, because I think people forget with horror, because like even The Nun, which came out recently and none of us had seen, wasn't very well reviewed, at least critically.
Yeah.
And it still made a buku amount of money. It opened to over 50 million on opening weekend.
Was that like the most successful of the Conjuring franchise or something?
Yeah, it was up there. Yeah. It was huge box office.
It set the whole series over $1 billion.
Yeah, so there's just a ton of money in horror, and it was just a massive, massive success, made like $300 million in the U.S. and all this stuff. And then Halloween, like on our episode we discussed, Halloween 2018, I said they'd be lucky to make $200 million worldwide. Now it looks like that's a complete certainty.
Yeah.
And they're gunning for 250 to 300. So horror is just huge right now.
That's very big for Blumhouse.
A movie that was made on a budget of $10 million.
Yeah, because, Warner Brothers has Conjuring, right?
Yes.
Or they have that and they have It, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? So Blumhouse does good business, but...
Yeah, because Blumhouse does production. They can release through whoever. I think that most of their recent stuff is through Universal.
Yeah.
Like the Purge movies and stuff like that. And then they have like some stuff goes straight to Netflix, and some of the other stuff goes other places. But
part of me wonders if James Wan went to Warner Brothers because he did work with Blumhouse
on Insidious.
Warner Brothers release or Lionsgate release Saw, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, he worked with them on Insidious. I wonder if it was a case where he was like, hey, to do this movie, or I don't know, I guess Warner Brothers probably had the rights, but you could see some directors leaving Blumhouse for budgetary reasons, like, hey, I need $40 million to do this movie right.
Yeah.
And them being like, we don't want to take those risks, which nobody can blame them. Like, they're doing good business, they know what they're doing. But also sometimes when you do take those risks, like the Conjuring franchise, like, you know what I mean? That's a $1 billion franchise now. They spend a little bit more money on each film, and it has at least paid off, even with something like The Nun, which isn't critically well received.
Yeah. So then, you have like these remakes and these franchise properties and things like that. And then Pet Sematary is one that, like, looking into this in more recent times, because a lot of these movies, when you watch these as a kid in the 80s, 90s, because Pet Sematary was all over cable TV for decades.
I don't know how I'd never seen it. I think I had seen the end of it once, but I think I missed like maybe the last 3/4 of it and then seen the very end. But as a kid, like we talked about Pet Sematary a lot for some weird reason. But probably it was the early 90s, like around 92, 93. I remember talking about this movie a whole lot.
Because I think that the Pet Sematary movies is something that happened for a lot of movies that had sequels in like the 80s, early 90s for like our age group, is that those movies would be on TV a lot. So the Pet Sematary 2 is a sequel that had Edward Furlong. So I think a lot of times my memory of part 1 and 2 were kind of mixed and combined, because I remember like a part with the kitten in Pet Sematary 2, the part with the cat in Pet Sematary, Gage, Fred Gwynn, who is, Hummer Munster.
Where's one where some guy attacks somebody in a bed? He's a zombie essentially. I don't know which that is, but I think that was a Pet. Did they make a TV version?
I don't remember.
Sci-fi or something.
I mean, there may have been. I don't know.
I don't know. I remember just turning on one day like Pet Sematary. I think that's what it was, and it was basically just like a zombie attack where I cannot remember which one that was though.
Let's see. So they made Pet Sematary was 89, Pet Sematary 2 was 92, and then there's the remake. So I don't think there was anything else with that. But yeah, so Pet Sematary 1 from 1989 is one we're talking about. And like I said, that's just a movie that seemed to me like forever was a mainstay on cable television. And I had mostly seen that on the TV edit version. And not that they had to cut a ton out, really, when you look. Because like stuff that, it's so funny watching some of these movies that got rated, like not Pet Sematary, but movies that got rated X or, or right on the verge of being rated X back in like the late 80s or mid 80s. You could show that on primetime now, like on AMC, like on Walking Dead or something. So it's just funny how the times have shifted. But yeah, Pet Sematary is a movie that, like, I don't think my parents ever rented the R-rated theatrical version for me. I just remember seeing it on TV. Yeah. And then I only really watched the full unedited version later when I was an adult. And it's been a while since I had seen this before we did this episode.
Yeah, I started rewatching it a while back and I got like an hour into it and for some reason just never finished it. I was enjoying it, but I'm glad we sat down and actually I watched the whole thing.
Yeah, in this episode we're just going to be discussing the movie, and I guess we can do spoilers throughout.
I mean, I think we do a short non-spoiler section for people for some reason haven't seen it if they are looking forward to the remake.
Yeah,
because honestly, sometimes when a film is about to come out, I may, depending on how the original is received, I may just say I'm going to just see the remake because I want to kind of judge it on its own merits. Because once plot points get spoiled or whatever,
it's done.
Because
I had seen that on TV years back. It came out in the 90s. I had seen it back in the 90s. And I started thinking, like, man, it's really long because it's like the 4 hours or whatever. So I remember watching it back then, hadn't watched it since then. And when it was time for the remake to come out, I was like, well, I don't want to rewatch it and kind of get all the plot beats we're going to get point for point and then rewatch it. I would rather just kind of go in fresh and experience the movie for what it is. So, like, yeah, I do get, like, that's kind of what you could do with Pet Sematary. If you've seen it and it's been a long time, maybe it is good to, I mean, some people, it's one of their favorite movies. They watch it constantly or watch it consistently. But it is one of those movies, too, where it's interesting that I've seen, I don't know if it's just the amplification factor of social media, but I've seen people talking about the perception of Pet Sematary, because as a kid, I always remembered it being pretty well received and people thought it was really scary. And then there's a lot of people who are like that. So when they announce the remake, it's like, oh, it's pointless. They shouldn't remake it. It's perfect. It's a classic. You shouldn't remake it or touch it. You have like that viewpoint. You have the people who said, actually, it sucked, so I'm glad they're remaking it. Maybe it'll be scary this time. And then you have people that seem like they kind of go just whichever way with the internet commenters and kind of just look to be a troll. So it's interesting seeing the opinions on this movie that get kind of released in the wake of the trailer for the remake being released.
I'm always up for giving remakes a shot, like pretty much all the time. So I'm interested in checking it out. I will say the trailer didn't do a lot for me, really.
It had some to me, it had like forced creepy imagery.
Yeah. And I haven't. It's from the directors of Starry Eyes, which you said you've seen.
Yeah.
How was that? I've always wanted to watch it, and I heard good things from it. I just have not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's on Netflix anymore. That's where I watched it initially. I heard good things about it, and I watched it. And for kind of like the mid-low tier budget horror movie, that seemed like it would probably been like a festival darling or something. Like I enjoyed it. Like I didn't come away from it thinking it was like one of my favorite movies of that year.
You weren't going to necessarily seek out their next work or anything like that.
Like if I saw something that was coming out that they had been involved with, I would have watched it because I think they did a segment for holidays as well. That anthology that Kevin Smith had a segment in that was basically just all the different holidays had their own little segment. Now that out of that anthology, I'm not sure which one they did. It says one of the opening ones. I don't remember caring much for most of the segments out of the anthology, aside from the Father's Day one. And that was one that had Jocelyn Donahue in it, who is also like from House of the Devil and stuff. So that's something I really liked. And I don't think they did that one. But I mean, some of them, they varied from like entertaining to just kind of like, why did I watch that?
But too, this is a trailer. This is probably heavily, dictated by the studio.
Yeah.
They could have, who knows? But I will say there's a shot with like kids going into the forest with animal mask. That is imagery used a lot. Actually,
well, and to me, that
animal mask stuff.
Well, because that one, so recently there's a music video that I was an extra in, and that Julie was in. That was for the band Prayer Line. So it's some of the guys who run the website Never Nervous. So if you follow our stuff and like the Louisville scene, they have a website as well.
Supporters of us,
and they have shared a lot of our short films. So go check that music video out because it's interesting.
Really well done. Yeah,
it's inspired by The Wicker Man, kind of
done by Mike Thompson and I forgot the DP's
Thomas
name.
Johns.
Yeah, Thomas Johns.
Or Tommy Johns.
And Mike Thomas. Mike
Thompson.
Thompson did a short film with Shelby, who's worked with us, called Iris.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. And then they were working on a feature. I think it's on hold, but he's also, I always follow him online too. He's also from Louisville.
Yeah, so go check that music video out. We shared it from our Facebook page, or you can just go search for their Facebook page or YouTube channel. It's just Prayer Line. And it's kind of like cool, like rock song that has evokes a lot of imagery from The Wicker Man and stuff like that. But
in context of this trailer, like that's not really super creepy anymore. You know what I mean? Like it was like that's the only different thing from different imagery, and it wasn't anything that was super striking.
Because if I remember correctly, I think Holidays, even that anthology, I think if I remember correctly, the poster for that is somebody with an animal mask on. So just that imagery.
And too, like I don't know, they do seem like they could have been store-bought masks. They look good, better than like $5 animal mask. But like even if they would have like I don't know, just went a little harder on the design of them and made them a little bit more original and like, you know what I mean? So even like iconic and striking looking, but they just look like they could have been found in a number of different videos.
And too, what's funny is, so in that music video they're talking about that was called, I'm forgetting what it was called. I'll look it up here real quick. But in that music video, they had characters wearing animal masks. And the animal mask, the one thing that I realized, any of them that have like a nose or a snout or anything, you have almost no vision. You do have like a little bit of peripheral vision, but very, very limited peripheral, and you can't look down. So when you're going through a wooded area or an area that has grass or vines or climbing, there's a scene where I had to run out into a field. And if you watch it very closely, you can see I'm on the verge of falling on my face because I was trying to run quickly, and I was running and I just couldn't see. So I was like foot gap, and luckily I didn't fall down, but it's just like those masks are very not practical. Oh, and the music video is called A Martyr's Death is what it was. But yeah, so those masks, like they look creepy, and it's just imagery that's used in a lot of different contexts and things like that. So that in and of itself, and it wasn't the original movie version. I don't remember what's in the book. But yeah, like the trailer for the new one looks like it'll be, creepy, because it's source material that lends itself to not be terrible. Because there's some source material you can get really, really wrong.
Yeah.
I think source material of there's a cemetery you can bury an animal or a person in and they come back to life. I think that's pretty easy material to mine for something. And the fact that they have, a good cast in it, they have John Lithgow and Jason Clarke.
So one of the screenwriters, whoever's adapting it for the remake, actually, I guess he wrote on the Suspiria remake, which That will be out by the time this podcast goes out.
In limited release.
No.
I think it's only going to like 250 theaters the first week.
This is the first week.
Yeah, but it was only like 2 or 3 theaters.
really?
I think the next branch is like
2nd?
250.
Oh my god!
Because I just saw some journalists today say that they thought it was going wider than that. But I mean, but we'll have to wait and see.
Anyway, Jason Clarke is playing Lewis Creed. I think he's great. I love him.
John Lithgow is the Judd character.
Yeah, I love him too. But Judd is so good in the original.
Yeah, or
John Lithgow, as good as he is, and he is incredible. It's hard. It's going to be hard to.
Well, that's a performance that you very much ingrain in your mind with what the actor looks and sounds like
to remove.
And he goes in, he's like, "Hey," he pulls out his like pocket knife and stuff. So there's always like very iconic moments that you associate.
And you're gonna, and again, you're gonna be feeling like, oh, John Lithgow, he's doing. Granted, he probably maybe didn't even watch this original film. You know what I mean? Because he didn't want to taint his. Who knows?
Yeah.
But in your mind, you're gonna be thinking, oh, what he's doing his version of this. You know, and it's just a shame because John Lithgow was an incredible actor in his own right.
And too, like without seeing it, he maybe just his complete. Before it came out, everybody was concerned about Bill Skarsgård being Pennywise. The movie comes out, and it's like he did something completely different than Tim Curry, and it worked exactly in that movie in the context.
But nothing
of
in the trailer is extremely striking from him.
Yeah.
But like Fred Gwynn, who plays Judd, he is just a strong presence.
Yeah.
Herman Munster, and just seeing him or just hearing his voice, it is so distinct. And I don't know. He's just he is phenomenal in that role.
Well, I guess we can actually move into discussing Pet Sematary, the original. Like I said, we'll start out without going into the full spoilers, but pretty much the only thing you need to know about the story for the movie, there is a pet cemetery deep in the woods that if you bury something in it, it comes back to life. And I think basically the longer it takes before you do it, the less the version that comes back is close to what they were before they died. And that's pretty much all you need to know the setup. And of course things go awry. And, there's spirits from beyond the grave trying to convince them not to use the cemetery. And they do, quite a bit of foreshadowing in the movie.
I mean, it's essentially his take on almost a zombie film, but it's also about, hey man, maybe you just sometimes accept death. Well,
and two, the opening of it reminded me somewhat of Arachnophobia, of moving from the big city, like a doctor and his family from the big city go to a small town. And, granted, there's different outcomes of all this stuff. Like Lewis Creed, and too, like the trivia for the movie, like Bruce Campbell was initially the first choice for Lewis Creed, and George Romero was intended to direct it. And then
Savini, they also wanted him at one point.
And then things happened, so then ended up that Mary Lambert directed it, and you had Dale Midkiff as Lewis Creed. But you said, Fred Gwynn is Jude Crandall, so Herman Munster from My Cousin Vinny, all these things where he has a very iconic presence in this movie. Is pretty pitch perfect, and I think that's when a lot of people have vivid memories of this movie and have this, childhood love for it. I think a lot of it is his performance.
He's just so likable. He's a neighbor you would like to have,
And the basic setup, the entire idea is you can put things in the cemetery and they come back to life. So of course, with childhood, stories, and you have pets, there's gonna be tragedy where something happens. If you can bring them back, then that's, something that I think most people would do, kind of regardless of what they think the consequences would be.
Yeah.
And because Fred Gwynn's character, Judd, shows Lewis where the cemetery is and tells him about it. And they have to hike up in the woods, and because one of his kids' cats goes missing. And
it's technically on is it Native American burial ground? Is that?
I believe so.
The Mimac people, I believe he calls them.
Yeah.
I assume that's real as far as the Mimacs. I'm not positive.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
A lot of that is, Indian burial ground. That explains a lot when you're trying to write pop fiction, essentially.
Poltergeist.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of in the United States of America, it's kind of a shorthand.
Yeah.
Because so in the prior episode, when Derek and I were talking about the haunting of Hill House, in the United States, a lot of the structures in this country are only a couple hundred years old. I mean, there's some of them that are older than that. Like they're built pretty much immediately after, Europeans settled here. But a lot of the buildings were built, especially not in the original colonies. Like, so a lot of the states that kind of got settled later in the game, a lot of structures, aren't that old. So there's not the tons of history that in a European location, you could have houses that are 1,000 years old and structures that are, older than that, and especially like churches and stuff. So there's like this history that a lot of those buildings can have that you can use the jumping off point for a story. The United States, a lot of the buildings have a lot less history and a lot younger and haven't been around as long. So Indian Burial Ground is a shortcut for that.
Also, I don't know what else now, but the Shining references, that possibly being the reason, or at least alludes to that.
And then there's the lodges from Twin Peaks and all that stuff. So there's, and two, the movie was shot in Maine. So like the
not
general
far from Stephen King's house.
The general area he likes everything to be kind of set in and shot in. And
very close to, it sounded like it was his life. I guess he had a pet cemetery behind his house. He had some experiences similar to some plot points in this film.
And then,
or close to.
And then like the other idea is like the house is pretty close to a main road where people will fly through at high speeds, especially like semis or things like that. Because, even here in Louisville, Kentucky, where you live, there's a lot of places that you can live where you have a driveway that you pull out into the road and the speed limit's 45, 55 miles an hour. So it's dangerous.
When we lived in Oldham County, that's what it was like, hilly roads, 55 miles an hour. And that's what my dog Ripley, I found her, like I went up a hill, 55 miles an hour, and she was like right next to the curb, eating like out of a chicken box. And I like got her because I'm like, she's going to get hit by a car and die. I've never found the owner, so I ended up keeping her. But yeah, that's exactly how it was at our house in Oldham County.
So that that's something I think people across a lot of the country have experienced, or at least because my parents' house is on a street where the speed limit's 35, but people like to do 50. And my dad got rear-ended one time, like pulling into their driveway, like put his turn signal on, slowed down properly, and the person just kept going. So I think that's something that a lot of people can associate with and have experienced to some extent, because that's kind of across the entire country. I'm sure there's parts like that, like West Coast everywhere.
Oh yeah. And
so you see like they foreshadow some bad things happening early with the trucks just kind of flying through. And yeah, I mean, I think most people are aware of what happens early in this movie.
I mean, we can just say like, okay, so I think this is one of the better Stephen King adaptations I've seen, especially,
well, the horror side, like excluding,
horror side. But still, I don't know what else did he do. I haven't seen The Stand. Was that a show? Was that
I think it's like a mini series.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. And then of course, Shawshank Redemption is incredible. But anyway, this is like, as far as the ones I've seen, probably like fourth or fifth, maybe.
Well, I mean, because you like when you're talking about the Stephen King adaptations, of course you have The Shining.
Yeah.
You have Carrie. You have,
as much as I love De Palma's, Carrie is not even rank at like my top. Maybe it's like top 4 or 5 De Palma. Like, that's a good movie, but I think some of it has aged not the best.
Let's see, because there's a ton of credits for Stephen King. So let's go back through here, because you can go back pretty far. So of course, like he wrote stuff. Wrote Creep Show, it's directed by George Romero. Christine is directed by John Carpenter. Then there's stuff that was more
Cujo, not a big fan of Cujo.
Cujo, Children of the Corn.
There's a lot of not great Stephen
Dead
King
Zone.
adaptations. That's pretty good, actually.
Cronenberg. Let's see, just going back. Maximum Overdrive.
That was really good, but maybe
Thinner. Let's see.
We've covered Thinner as well.
Yeah. Tommy Knockers. You got, include Tommy Knockers. That was a TV series though. Lawnmower Man. That was title only. So I think that was the title, and then they completely changed everything about the story. Misery.
Misery's pretty good too.
Let's see.
I don't know, but this is,
Tales from the Dark Side, the movie.
As far as horror goes, it's a really well done Stephen King adaptation, I think, considering sometimes the track record with some of those.
Yeah, was it Silver Bullet, Cat's Eye? So there's a lot of things, Firestarter. So he's had his hand in a lot of horror, and I do think that when it comes to quality and perception wise, that Pet Sematary tends to be higher up the list for
Yeah.
most people because I don't think. I mean, there are people that probably put it above The Shining. I personally wouldn't do that.
No, me neither.
I mean,
No.
but for Stephen King's perspective, if you're a Stephen
Yeah.
King completist or loyalist, Pet Sematary does follow a lot closer along to the book than The Shining did. So it's not as much of like an adaptation. I mean, it's still an adaptation, but it doesn't take as many liberties with the source material or the meaning behind the overall story.
It's The Shining is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining as
Yeah.
much as it's Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Well, and two, like watching, not to go too far off track, but if you haven't watched The Haunting of Hill House, so Mike Flanagan has been tapped to direct Dr. Sleep, which is the novel that Stephen King wrote is the sequel to The Shining. And watching that show and seeing how he handled the adaptation of that book, The Haunting of Hill House or House on Haunted Hill or whatever. So seeing that was an adaptation, and this was like, I haven't read all the book, I just read the synopsis, but what he did was just kind of taking a lot of the elements of it and changing it around in a way. Because Stephen King had even praised that adaptation. So to me, I get really excited for him to be the one that tackles Dr. Sleep, because I think he'll approach it in a way that pays homage to both the book and the movie and does something a little bit different with the new direction.
And then Gerald's Game was pretty faithful, right? I didn't read
Yeah, I mean, I
that.
think it was pretty faithful.
From what
So
I heard, yeah.
So a lot of those things. It's Gerald's Game. Was
Yeah.
it 1922? Wasn't that Stephen King as well?
Yeah, but I was thinking about Mike Flanagan did Gerald's Game, right?
Yes.
That's okay, yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
1922 was also
Yeah. So Pet Sematary, like in terms
Stephen King. That MFR has to be so loaded. I don't know. We could probably easily look it up, but
well, then
damn.
recently he got some press because he gave some like student filmmakers the rights to make one of his properties for
Yeah.
like $1. So he does every now and then. So he does, cool
There was
stuff
a
like
website
that.
you could go to and you could license. There was like some short stories that you had free range to license as long as you weren't making a profit on it, or you
Yeah.
pay $1, something like that. There's like 10 different stories, I think, short stories you can legally adapt, which is very, very cool,
Yeah. Yeah, but Pet Sematary, so without really getting into the ton of spoilers, so to me I think Pet Sematary is a movie that's more unsettling than it ever is scary, because it sets up this concept, it sets up what the consequences of this are, and it puts it kind of puts all the chess pieces on the board to say something's going to happen, and then it does happen.
And I think it was, again, Cujo was a misfire for me, the film, because it was like, hey, this is about this killer dog, but the whole movie they aren't being pursued by the dog or attacked by it the whole movie, but it felt unbalanced in the emotional core, the stuff they tried to push in there that just felt like they was almost weighing the film down. Also, it was trying to give it more, I guess, meat, but it just felt nonsensical. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean,
it didn't really feel like it needed to be there in that way, but
Yeah.
this feels like it intertwines so much stuff, and the emotional cores to these only continue to build, and also intertwine well into the more genre heavy elements of it.
Yeah, because I think that with Cujo, it feels more like it lost its effectiveness over time. Like it was probably far
Yeah.
more effective during the time it was released than it is today.
Yes.
Just because we've seen things shot in of similar concepts, and I mean, you can't really knock a movie for being shot on the budget that it was and the time period that it was. But technology and camera stuff has progressed so much, and cinematography and equipment and all that stuff, so that if you were to shoot a movie like Cujo today, you'd have much more dynamic, interesting shots than
Yeah,
people just
but-
sitting in a car with the dog
But for
jumping
me,
on the
it was
window.
the whole relationship with husband and wife. It just felt like I'm like, what, I don't know. It didn't add up in the end.
Yeah.
Where this, everything is building towards this concept, and it all just fits so well.
Well, and you have-
and it's handled really well by the director too, Mary Lambert.
Yeah.
But also, again, I guess according to some of the trivia we read, Stephen King, I think it was one of the first ones, or the first screenplay adaptation he wrote of his own novel, and then he required them to stick very closely to it as well.
Yeah,
So-
'cause-
and it could have been because of the way some of the previous ones were handled.
Yeah, I mean, and two, when you watch this movie, it's like I said, it's more unsettling than it is scary. So, some of the imagery that comes along with using the Pet Sematary, not even things that are actually really there, just the imagery that comes along to the family as they, come into contact with it. Some of that stuff is probably the scariest in the movie.
Yeah.
More so than what comes out of the cemetery itself. And
again, the imagery, that could be updated and probably improved on.
Because I think with the new movie, so, practical effects are great. And I think that's what hopefully they lean very heavily on practical effects. I think practical effects and prosthetics have gotten a lot better in the modern era. Because a lot of the old stuff looks great and stands out, and you still sit there and remember it in your head a lot. But I think that today's technology, they got to the point that some things look a little bit scarier and looks a little bit less rubberish and a little bit less stiff. But then again, like some of that old practical stuff just looks amazing, and I don't know that you could ever top that with any type of combination of CG and practical. But I think that in the new movie, they could go for a more terrifying appearance of things pretty easily.
Or just kind of tone at times, This does have a lot of films from that era, especially they just have all a similar tone.
Those early 90s.
They just they feel very familiar and comforting. Now some directors take such drastic, again, when you had Kubrick in that era, it was just so, I don't want to say alienating because it was just so striking. Now directors, I think, have a lot more freedom maybe to even do, again, like something like Suspiria that appears to be
a name-only remake of the very core concepts.
It seems like some ideas, but as far as it seems like it's going to rely heavily on imagery probably, and just just a different type of feel than versus even something like the new Halloween. You know what I mean? Where that just feels very familiar and fine. I'm just trying to think of. I don't know why I'm drawing some blanks, but I think the acceptance of more unconventional storytelling in films, sometimes relying just on visuals and music and sound design, is way more accepted, and also it's more widespread, so more directors are influenced by that and lean into it. So I think they could really make it tonally different, for sure. But again, I think what works in this film is the relationships and the emotional core, and that is something that, like, I don't know, it's debatable if it can be improved upon. Anything seems like it can be improved upon, but it's something that they nailed, and that's why I think this film still holds up, because that stuff still works and will always work.
Yeah, I think that, like, if you were to look at a template for what you're wanting to accomplish or the direction you might want to go with the Pet Sematary remake, I don't think you look at it, because I think that's more of an event film that has more broad set pieces and things like that. I think for this movie, some people may hate this, suggestion, but maybe Hereditary is more of a template of the family dread element.
For sure.
Is like the more is the thing to hit on.
I didn't mention that one, but that was kind of, that's kind of in that wheelhouse of a little bit different, but it's not too alienating.
Because I think that Pet Sematary
I loved Hereditary.
I think by virtue of what Pet Sematary is, I don't think the box office will come close to touching that of it. But I think that, a well-done movie of that type can easily target $100 million gross.
Yeah.
Because we've seen The Conjuring and, some of those other movies do that. So I think that that's definitely within grasp. But talk about the original movie, I think just the iconic element of, like, Fred Gwynne's performance, because some of the stuff doesn't hold up as much towards the last act.
Yes, no.
The post-cemetery resurrection.
Honestly, that could be improved on between a mixture of practical and CG. I think that's the ideal thing to do, is blend a lot of that, or stunt acting.
Because I had read some trivia for the movie, and that was before I rewatched it again. And after I read that trivia, like I said, it's been years since I rewatched it, like 5-6 years maybe. And then before that, I watched it as a kid on TV. So stuff that wasn't immediately obvious to me when I watched this in standard definition in a pan and scan TV version from the 90s, watching it in a widescreen HD transfer, knowing that some of the effects or some of the stunts were done in a certain way with certain props or whatever, you watching like, oh, that is completely...
I read that as well.
That is fake. And I think those elements, when you're watching it now, like if you're engrossed in the story, then that type of stuff isn't that big of a deal. But when you show that to a group of, say, 17-year-olds or something, that may stand out
sometimes it breaks the
as
immersion.
A barrier.
And two, maybe because us being older generation than them at least, we're used to seeing so many films from our childhood that incorporated some elements where things just looked fake, but you were like, that's fine, I'm along for the ride. Now, if things look fake in that specific way, they might be fine with fake CGI, but if they see a fake dummy, they're like, no, I'm out of it. I'm checked out.
If you rewatch, Reanimator, there's like the cat that's on their back that's like just like a stuffed animal or something.
Yeah.
So that sticks out, I think, more than a transformer in a scene smashing a building, because this is fake and it could never exist in real life. So that makes it a little bit more plausible than if you see something that this is supposed to be a real thing, but it's fake. So I think that like when you Pet Sematary, I think some of those elements kind of hurt the rewatchability if you're not into it from the start. If you're not buying into the world and the characters and their relationships, then some of that could take away from it. But I think if you go into it and you get bought into the characters, then you will enjoy it from beginning to end. And it's one of those movies that, without spoiling anything, like the ending isn't exactly upbeat, and the tone of it's just kind of dread and kind of downbeat, because the entire concept of a cemetery that can bring the dead back to life, but different than they were when they were alive, that entire concept lends itself to a downer story. And I mean,
and sometimes I think that films that have more of a downer tone that limits them at the box office. Seemingly, I don't want to just make a blanket statement,
because the original Pet Sematary wasn't a huge box office hitter.
But something like it, that is just like a fun roller coaster that mostly has a good ending.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And it's like a raha, and it is everybody leaves like yes. But this, on a down note, you got to be an audience that is like, oh yeah. Things get dark, and
So actually, it did make it. So in the U.S., unadjusted for inflation, it made $57 million on a budget of 11. So it was very profitable for the time it came out. So maybe
they made that sequel just a couple years later.
Yeah. So if this made 50 something domestic in the U.S. in 89, then I think that adjusted for inflation, this remake should easily be able to get to 100 if it's a quality film. But like looking on Metacritic and stuff, so the Metacritic score for Pet Sematary is 38. The user score is 6.6. So I think there is some element of people that didn't really think all that highly of it critically. And because a lot of movies that are horror, what is funny is you watch these movies that you just thought people liked. Because like when we were younger, you would rent a movie or watch it on TV. You didn't go online and see a Rotten Tomatoes score. You may read your local paper's review or something. So the tomato meter for Pet Sematary is 48%. The audience score is 59%. So I think that it's kind of split between the people who really love it from when they watched it and the general audience that was just like, I don't like this.
I had a book I bought, I think from Red Giraffe Video Rental, that it was just like 1001 movie reviews. And it was just like literally a paragraph and the star rating, and I use that as my guide. I don't remember who wrote it, but back then it was just like, dude, one critic could just change your whole perspective on films as far as what you watched and what you did.
Siskel and Ebert, they'll give 2 thumbs up or whatever, and then you had like Leonard Maltin, I think, had like books.
Gene Shalit, and then the local critics too in the paper. But
and then today
there's like a few people that just controlled so much. That's why critics got paid so much more back then.
And then today it's been democratized where we're sitting here doing a movie review podcast.
Yeah.
You can go on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere, Reddit, Tumblr, anywhere, and find
Your
reviews.
cousin Lenny is telling you what he thinks about the new Halloween.
You can find reviews and snippets about anything. You can find podcasts about everything. Because like the new joke is like, oh, what's your podcast about? It's like, so there's all these outlets. But Pet Sematary is a movie that, as a kid, I remember being a well thought of movie. I remember people thinking it was scary and liking it. And it was only in like when I was doing research for some of this stuff, I was like, oh, wait a minute, it actually has like a low score on some of this stuff. And
I think it's good.
And I think it's just of an era. So I think what happens is a lot of times horror kind of gets shat on during the era it's released and then only really gets a fair reappraisal later. Because like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, is in my opinion one of the best straight like sci-fi or horror movies ever made. When it came out, it was like a critical and box office bomb. And then a lot of those critics who gave it bad reviews when it came out had to kind of eat crow and reevaluate it years later and give it a more positive review. Because they wanted it to be E.T., and it was not E.T., because it had a downbeat tone to it as well. So I think with this movie, it's kind of in that vein of a movie that since it wasn't an upbeat thrill ride.
Yeah.
Because even like those Friday the 13th and Halloween movies, you had a heroine or a hero, and there was some element of thrill to it.
And a lot of times they killed. I mean, so the final girl would kill Jason in the end, or
Yeah.
something, and then
Or
maybe get picked off in the next one.
Because they're like Halloween or not Halloween, Friday the 13th part 6, Jason Lives. You had Tommy Jarvis again, so you had like a male hero and like a kind of final girl character. But like just this type of movie was one that didn't have the action element to it. And this too, the late 80s to early 90s was when slashers started to kind of die out, and you had your final movies in the Friday the 13th, the Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween series for a while. Because Halloween had Halloween 5 in 89, and then the next one in 95 or 6. So this was when a lot of those series were starting to wind down, and horror was kind of transitioning into what its next kind of little segment would be. And so like the early 90s, you had a lot of supernatural stuff. Like this, because this is 89, but you had this, and you had like the Child's Play sequels. And then, you had the tapering off of all the slashers, and then Scream came out in 96.
Blair Witch.
Yeah, and then the late 90s, you got more of the supernatural. In the early 2000s, you had more of like the Japanese remakes. But in this period of the 90s, you had a lot of stuff that was kind of, not sure what it wanted to do. But Pet Sematary, to me, had a pretty consistent tone of what they were going for. And I think they accomplished what they're going for.
Yeah.
And I think they had some creepy moments in it. I don't think that you set this in front of somebody now who's never seen it and they'll be scared out of their mind. I think they would come away and be like, oh, I enjoyed that.
This is like more of just a macabre tale, I think,
Which is
rather
why,
than like a scary film.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's ripe for a remake,
Yeah.
because the concept is solid, and it's not, so, like I said, aside from like the Fred Gwynn performance, like some of it could be improved on, like the stuff with the kid. But, some of the other elements of it.
Yeah, I mean, the characters there, relationships are there. The core of it is rock solid, I think.
And then, too, like the relationship between, like, Lewis and, his wife's family, is something a lot of people could probably relate to some extent. And it just has, like, some of those iconic moments.
Well, and another thing, too, it's been a while since they've remade it. We could say that. It's been a long while. It's a whole new audience. But also, too, maybe some people that watched it back then, like me, didn't have a kid then, and now you have a kid, and they're like, okay, well, it makes you think about a lot of things. So
yeah, because there's even because one of the most classic things from it is the sewer drain sequence.
Yeah.
And that's something that everybody remembers, and then they were able to kind of redo that in the new one in a way that would be entertaining to a different audience. This movie, the road scene, I'm sure you can milk that for a lot more.
Yeah.
Just because technology's progressed enough.
It was handled really well, though.
I mean, it was handled well, and it was a tragic thing, and it stuck out in my mind as like a horror scene I always remembered.
Yeah.
Even though it didn't really show much, I remembered it. But I think that, in this day and age of technology, you might be able to show a little bit more of it.
So we can probably go into spoilers now. We can give a score at the end or whatever. I don't know. I really like it.
I mean, some of these movies, it's kind of hard to give a score to, because like we're talking about like
we can give one at the very end.
The Haunting of Hill House, I gave a score to, but it's like that's an entire series. Like an individual episode could be a 10, and the next one is like a 6.
What did you give the series?
I gave it like a 8.5 or 9.
Did Derek give it 11 out of 10?
He gave it 10, I think.
Yeah.
So it's not any hyperbole from him or hype, but
every month or two, something comes out that is his new favorite thing of the year.
Yeah, but so now we can move into our spoiler discussion of Pet
It's on
Sematary.
Amazon Prime also, if you do want to just watch it before that remake.
There's all kinds of
Because it is
versions you can
April. It is a
buy.
little ways away.
Yeah, April
But
2019.
If you wait it since 1989, then maybe you can wait 6 more months.
If you haven't watched it since 1994 or something. But yeah, so do full spoilers for like I said, most of this movie you probably are aware of.
Yeah.
I mean,
I really don't have a lot to talk about as far as spoilers goes, but there's a lot of great little moments in it. But also too, I like the element of the guy who had passed away that is the warning spirit.
Yeah.
A little bit of
the guy that was saving
American Werewolf and
or the guy that was treating the hospital, and he was like trying to warn them as like a helpful thing.
a little bit of American Werewolf in London, the friendly ghost,
And then you have like the flashbacks to Zelda.
Yes.
So those are like the creepy elements I think they're probably going to play
that was
up.
very much more pop horror, which Stephen King is the king of, but that was that I feel like Stephen King does that a lot, where it's like, okay, you have this story, and then all of a sudden, unexpectedly, you get this other weird supernatural type thing.
Gerald's Game does that.
Yeah, like it's all of a sudden this other weird thing that also comes into play. Sometimes I think it doesn't work as well in his, it's Gerald's Game. It doesn't work good, I don't think, at all.
For a lot of people, it kind of took him out of it a little bit.
Yeah, but this, I think it works enough because this film maybe needed a little bit more. It needed a little bit more pop horror
to be fleshed
stuff
out a little bit
to kind of entertain a little bit more as far as that side of it, and not just be all drama. And that helped build those elements up. I think it did a good job of kind of filling things out.
Because having like the spirit that comes to warn them about to not use the cemetery, and having the Zelda stuff in it.
The Zelda stuff was the creepiest, I think.
That adds some scares, and that adds some, traditional horror elements, because otherwise you essentially have a movie that bring a cat back and they bring a baby back, and then at the very, very, very end they bring the wife back. So there's not it'd be kind of a slower paced, character study, but those elements, like the Zelda stuff especially, adds in the moment that was a lot of people's nightmare fuel when it came out. And
it also, too, it gave you perspective on, okay, it seems like the dad is a good guy just because the parents don't, the father-in-law, mother-in-law don't like him. Oh, they seem like they're kind of, shitbags, basically.
So like Rachel's character's like, Zelda being her sister, and it's like this creepy...
Which was played by a man.
Yeah, I remember reading that. So that's like this creepy element that comes into play in the movie, and it's like a character I think they'll probably play up a lot in the remake, just because that's really... allows you a lot of room there to do something really creepy or scary with it. But then like Fred Gwynn is Judd. So, he's the one that kind of introduces him to the concept of the Pet Sematary and sets all these events into motion by telling them, by trying to be a good neighbor and trying to be helpful. But then... And
again, too, we get to go into his backstory and see some cool, entertaining stuff from his past.
And they brought a dog back.
They brought a dog, and then essentially they let a zombie loose in their hometown after he passed away after the Second World War.
So they realized to not use that for humans.
And, they burned down the house that he's in, and apparently he yells, death good, like alive bad or something. And I think that was a line uttered from Bride of Frankenstein, apparently, according to the trivia.
Well, and two, just like that, like the Judd character is somebody that you like, and you do feel like he's in peril. And the scene of like him, he's looking for Gage, like that is a scene I remember.
Yeah.
And I always have remembered. So when Gage has the scalpel, and I don't know how believable it is that a very small child of that size easily takes out like a full grown
He's
adult
imbued by
man.
the spirit of the Mimac or whatever.
Yeah. But so like but the elements we were talking about earlier alluding to that are, so in the movie, initially when this movie came out, like there were some children's rights groups who were like, oh man, you had this kid in these scenes that are really adult and heavy and they shouldn't have been around. But they actually, for almost every scene of Gage when he's like brought back as a zombie, they're shot in singles with just him and none of the other crew or actors. And most of the interactions of him are a stunt double or a dummy. And when you watch that, it is very clear that they are fighting with a dummy.
Dropping from the ceiling. It's just like they dropped a straight up dummy. Like,
so
man, you couldn't have dropped a stunt double down or something.
Yeah, just like an adult that is smaller or shorter or something. But the element that element does stick out a little bit when you rewatch it. That's pretty noticeable, and especially when you read that trivia before you watch it, and you're like, oh, that is completely.
But I think the very end too. Whenever he has to kill his own kid, like the way they handle that is so well done too, because obviously that would be like the worst thing. Like, one, dealing with the death of a child, two, bringing them back and you having to re-kill them in the way it is. I mean, essentially, I think a lot of people also know what it's like to put down a pet, and you see him euthanize the cat by sticking it in his ass for some reason. Out front, and then he does it to his own kid. So it's like, if you went through euthanizing an animal and you see like the life slowly drain from their eyes, and him having to do it to his own son, like that was, I think that's handled extremely well, as cheesy as some of the fighting stuff is before it.
Well, too, there's the element to it of your child passes away, and then you have this glimmer of hope that you can bring them back, and they come back different. So the version of them that's in your head is what you're seeing of them last. Is not the version that you're aware of. It's an evil version that's degraded mentally and not the same. So you're kind of sullying the memory of who you put in there, and then you have to kill them all over again. And all of the promise of them being back is gone, and it's even worse because you had them again. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's, again, the crux of this story is just so ripe for, just some basic I guess, trauma that humans have to deal with, which is death. You know what I mean? That everybody has to deal with on some level.
And then you have
if you're lucky enough to have lived long enough to, experience.
Yeah. And then the movie as you go along, so Rachel passes away because she gets killed by Gage. And then he's like, well, she's fresher, so it'll be better. And then the ending ends on kind of this down note of like, she's actually evil, even though she's back. So, it's kind of like the self-delusion that we were required to think that would work.
And two, you don't know, is he going to learn to accept death and be like, okay, look, I'm just going to let her rest? No, he does it. And again, he gets punished for it.
And two, how would he possibly explain to the police what had happened?
Yeah, true.
When his wife is dead, his neighbor's dead, and his dead son's body is back in the house or whatever. Like, there's a lot of that would have been very difficult to explain. And there's the element too where his in-laws call him on the phone because their kids are staying with the in-laws or his other child or children. And they want to talk to him because the girl had a bad dream about their mom.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, well, she can't come to the phone now, and just kind of hangs up on him because she's already dead.
Yeah.
So there's the element, too, of, they're going to hate him even more. The in-laws are going to hate him even more because not only did their grandchild die, and they unfairly...
And he already lied on the phone about the cat, too.
Yeah.
He already had to, suffer through that.
Yeah, so there's the element, too, of, all these, familial things. And they were wrong to be super upset at him for his son's death because they couldn't have really controlled that. Accidents happen. So there's that element, but then he would be directly responsible for his wife's death because he brought the son back. So there's all these elements going on. There's a ton of dramatic tension there and things that, a lot of times, like I've said before, horror, when you've watched enough of it, nothing really sits there and makes you jump and go, oh, I'm scared. But if it makes you think a lot after it and then kind of put yourself in the shoes of your the characters and then think about it, it's doing an effective job. And this movie has a lot of material to think about, well, what would I do?
Again, Hereditary deals with a lot of family drama and death. And I think that was a very good comparison there of how it could be handled because the themes are very, very similar in some regards for sure.
And I think this movie has some... compared to Hereditary, depending on this remake, how closely it goes to the source material and all this stuff, there's a lot of room where they could take it even more graphic horror imagery than Hereditary or make more explicit what's going on. Because there's not really a mystery to Pet Sematary. It's just you do this, they come back to life, there's repercussions.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
As opposed to Hereditary, it's more of you kind of figuring out what's going on.
It's really a premise that you can explain in one sentence and then the crux of it.
But then you can deal with the dread.
Yeah, they could kind of hide that a little bit to build up some more mystery and suspense. Another scene too that is when he's after he digs up his kid and he's holding him in the cemetery. Dude. You know what I mean? I can imagine that feeling good for that moment, just thinking, okay, I'm holding my kid one more time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff in this movie, despite having some cheesy effects at times and stuff. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that remake turns out. Right now, the trailer seems a little vanilla for me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these trailers, early on, depending on what the amount of footage they have is, what's the point in the post-production process it's at.
Marketing plans, for sure.
Because a lot of horror remakes, and you look at horror remakes, there's the ones that, so it became a big spectacle remake, kind of taking the Pennywise, because Pennywise is already kind of a cultural icon, so taking that character that everybody knows about and putting the veneer of the Amblin Stranger Things kind of nostalgia wave that we're having over that story that already worked before and with a character that was an icon, then you have that type of, product that's being put out there that's easier. I think it's an easy sell because it has clowns, so clowns are always scary. And then some stuff like the Evil Dead remake was just oh, it's scarier than the original, and they kind of marketed about how gory it was and stuff like that. This one, I think the tone is what they're going to have to push on it, and the sense of dread. And that first trailer didn't really do that. It just, like you said, it had the kids wearing the animal mask marching through the woods, which is, to me, just kind of feels forced a little bit. But I mean, it could work perfectly well in the context of the film.
Yeah,
it's just there's a lot of things in trailers to me that are just very overdone.
You want to see reasons of again, but Suspiria, you see the trailer for that, and you're like, okay, cool, this is way different than the original.
Yeah, I mean,
and this just feels okay, what are you giving me that's new? Different actors, obviously.
Yeah, are they gonna stick really close to the original story?
Yeah, but this isn't strikingly different.
Yeah, at least from what we've seen so far.
So far, yeah.
Because they could, do some, upend some of the tropes and twist things around and do something different. Because it stayed pretty close to. I think it omitted a lot of stuff and changed some things, but the core of the story was pretty similar. They did take out the child, gangbang scene.
Yeah. So,
but Pet Sematary is one where you could keep a lot of the stuff. You could even just flesh out more of the flashback stuff with like the Judd character and flesh out more of the Zelda stuff and mine a lot of that for more scares and more like visceral, in your face horror movie elements. Or they could focus more on the family element of it and go more like on the existential dread and impending doom that you can feel coming, and maybe offer up a twist on where things go based on what the original did and what the book did. So,
I'm very interested to see what direction they take. But hopefully it's not just middle of the road,
Yeah, hopefully it's not a paint by numbers, just kind of redo, because there's a lot of those. Because like in the 2000s, like The Omen was kind of just like a paint by numbers redo, and there's been a number of movies.
Poltergeist remake.
Yeah, the one where because Derek had talked about that like earlier, I think. I remember if it was on the podcast or what, but like the biggest scare in the entire movie was a squirrel.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like paint by numbers remakes, because there was what are some of the other ones that were made in like the 2000s? There's like all those post Texas Chainsaw and there's all these remakes that came out, and some of them just brought absolutely nothing to the table. Because like the Gus Van Sant Psycho, it's like almost shot for shot the same thing, just color and actors that weren't really super well suited to the roles. Because like Vince Vaughn is good in a lot of things, but I think in Psycho, I don't know if he was the choice for that. But so hopefully it doesn't stick as closely to the material as the Psycho remake did, which is I think more of like an art school project to like, let's remake a classic.
So weird they greenlit that.
But I guess there's some people who just don't like stuff in black and white and wanted the stabs to actually connect more with the body. But with Pet Sematary, I think there's so much ground there, the angles you can approach the story with and kind of sink your teeth into and make it more of its own thing. But like the original one is one that if it pops up on streaming services or on TV, I usually watch part of it because I generally enjoy it. Like like scores and stuff. It's one that's kind of hard to rate, and like a lot of our scores are kind of like trying to compare what we gave Halloween to this would be, just because you give one score and one the other. Because like if you look at Pet Sematary based on this nostalgic attachment I have to it and what I remember seeing it as a kid and all that, then it's more like a 9. And then if I rate it more objectively today, then it's more like a 7 in terms of just watching it today. How would I explain? What level of recommendation would I give to somebody that's never seen it? And then 2 depends on people's tolerance for effects and storytelling. Because a lot of that does look pretty different today versus in 89. But, it's a movie I do think it has enough elements that hold up, that it is something that you can recommend and rewatch. I don't think it's like an absolute stone cold classic like The Shining, but I do think that it's a very serviceable, memorable King story that has like a premise that's kind of just a killer premise that you can, like I said, just leaves you thinking about a lot of things. Like, what would you put in the cemetery? Like, what could you use it for?
It's not just a good premise, it's a good execution on the premise.
And then, too, like, would it almost be a form of punishment for someone to kill them and bring them back and then imprison them or something? Yeah. So they're in this, like, altered version. There's, like, all these different things you can go with. But, yeah, like I said, like, if I objectively give it a score and take all the nostalgia away, I think that, like, a 7. Because I think that's where some of the reviews kind of land today. Like, the user scores are closer to that. I definitely don't think it's like a 30% or something.
Yeah, like I said, it's on the upper end for me. I'd probably give it, like, an 8.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely solid. And holds up well for being, for possibly being so dated as some films from this era can be at times. And sometimes being dated adds to their charm, but this is not one of those films where being dated would add to the charm, I don't think, as far as what qualities it has that are positive, which is the story and the characters and the relationships. But because of all that, I think it's super solid, and I think it will continue to hold up for like another 20 years.
And it's a story too that if you add in modern technology like smartphones and the internet and search engines and stuff, none of it really changes the core of that story pretty much at all. So in modern era, it just changes a very small amount of background noise.
Yeah.
It doesn't really change the core of anything about it. So I think that that's one of those stories that'll kind of hold up. And if the remake does well, then they might go to another sequel. Maybe get Eddie Furlong back. I'm not sure what he's doing these days, but yeah. So I guess I can wrap up our discussion of Pet Sematary. Just a movie that Maybe I'll throw in the October rotation. I just hadn't watched it as much as recently because for the podcast we're going through things we haven't watched in a while or new things. And that's a movie I had seen a bunch in the 90s. And I just hadn't really watched it that much as an adult. But rewatching it, like there is a nostalgia, element to it. It made me want to go back and watch the Munsters.
Yeah.
After watching it, but yeah. So that wrap up our discussion of Pet Sematary. And if you're enjoying the podcast, you can do us a huge favor, leave a review in iTunes to help other people find the podcast. You can find all the work we're doing at housebyvideostore.com. You can find links to all of our social media accounts to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all of that. And make sure to follow us specifically on Facebook and YouTube to see our short films and such, because the one Share that we released a while back is still out. And there's another one that Chad shot, They Knock, that's in post-production now. And then we may try to get some other stuff out at some point. So keep an eye on all those. On our Instagram, we do try to post stories and stuff to make it worth following. So follow us there as well. And then if you want to find us specifically on the internet, the best place to find me is on Instagram at @TheWilliamCaps.
And I'm on Twitter at SplevinSean.
And that'll wrap up this episode of the House by Video Store podcast. Thanks for listening.
House by the Video